Om Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurumedev Sarvakareshu Sarvada. Om Shri Swami Narayana Namaha. Om Shri Sadgurubhyo Namo Namaha. So today we will examine one of the statements made by Shri Gunatitananda Swami. Gunatitananda Swami was a great Paramahansa of Bhagwan Shri Swaminarayan, and he is considered by many to be the incarnation of Akshara Brahma, or what is also known as Moola Akshara Brahma. So in his teachings in Junagadh and other places, he spoke on many different topics related to spiritual development and the unfoldment of the realization of God within oneself, of the spirit within oneself, the Atma meaning spirit. And he spoke extensively about his Ishtadevata, Bhagwan Swaminarayan, and his glory, his Swarupa, his form, his powers, his Aishwarya, his eminence. All of those types of teachings one can find in Gunatitananda Swami's teachings. So today we're going to examine one of his statements from a scripture called Swamini Vato, which is a compilation of his teachings. And he has stated the following. I'm going to say it in Gujarati and then translate it. આપણે તો અક્ષરધામમાં જવું છે એવો એક સંકલ્પ રાખો. What does this mean? He's saying that we must keep only one thought, one primary thought. The word sankalpa means thoughts, lots of different thoughts and emotions and feelings within the internal mental structure. So sankalp means all of that. And it has more meaning, but we'll get into that slowly. So he's saying that keep one primary thought, one primary wish, one primary thought, one primary desire in the mind, and that is that we have to go into the Akshardham. The word Akshar means imperishable, a state of realization, a place, a spiritual place that is eternally existing. That is called Akshara. The word Kshar, K-S-H-A-R, means perishable. And the word Akshar means imperishable or immutable, eternal. The word Dham means abode or residence of. Residence of God in this case. So Akshardham is the residence of Bhagwan himself, of God. God resides in his abode. This is the point. Abode meaning residence. So Akshar is a spiritual dimension beyond the name and form world, beyond the names and forms. So it is a state beyond the three bodies that we have, the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body. You know, if you look at the Vedanta scriptures of Shankaracharya, Adi Shankaracharya, they are all talking about transcending, meaning going beyond these three bodies and realizing that you are a divine spirit, divine soul, truth, consciousness, and bliss, Sat Chit Ananda, and to realize that state of oneness with Akshara, not oneness with Maya. Maya is what? Maya is where the soul is trapped with all of its ignorance. So we'll go into this slowly. The point here that Swami is making, Gunatitananda Swami, that he is encouraging and asking all of his devotees, bhaktas, to maintain one primary thought. And that thought is that we have to leave this world and enter into the next world. Now, this might be a scary thought. You know, when we think about death It's a scary thing. But the fact is, there are people dying all the time. So many millions of life forms are born into this world and they go from this world. That is why this world is called Mrityu Loka. Loka meaning world or plane of existence. Mrityu meaning the fact that it is that everyone, every being has to go, it has to die one day. So when Swami says that apne ek sankalp rakho, apne Akshardham ma jawu che, that where are we headed? What is our destination in life? Generally people are running after three things in life. One is money, the other is sexual pleasure, and third thing is status and position and power. Status, position, power, that's the third thing. The constant running after these three things is what is called this sansara. Sansara meaning ocean of existence that is filled with pleasure and pain. It is a mixture of pleasure and pain, and sansara has its quality where it's like an ocean with the waves on the top. Just as the ocean has innumerable waves, similarly, all beings are like waves on the substratum of Akshara Brahma. In fact, the entire universe and multi-universes are all waves on the substratum of Akshara Brahma. In fact, the way it is described in many scriptures, including Vachanamrut, of course, which is the teaching of Sri Swamini Bhagavan, that all of the intermediate entities, from the 14 lokas to the Virat Purush to Mahat Tattva, Pradhan, Prakriti, Pradhan Purush, Mool Purush, all the way up to Akshardham, the entire range of various evolutes that have come out of Prakriti, all of them are waves on the ocean of Akshara Brahma. The Akshara Brahma is limitless, without any end. That is the formless aspect. Nirakara meaning without form. Akar means form, Nirakara means without form. Which forms are we talking about? Forms that we can perceive through our senses. We have 5 senses, so we perceive the world of names and forms. So continuing here, the waves and the ocean analogy is a very good analogy to understand what Gunaditanand Swami is talking about. Because this one line, Apne Akshardham ma jawu che evo ek sankalp rakho, it has everything in it. The entire Sanatan Dharma and all of its teachings are in this one line. All of the Swaminarayan scriptures are in there. All of the Vedanta scriptures, the Upanishads, everything is in this one line. Bhagavad Gita, everything is in one line. And we're going to try to open it all up carefully. Now, cannot open everything up, but step by step as much as we can in easy to understand language so that it becomes clear as to what he is referring to and what our life can become. There is a great practicality that is shown in this verse also about sankalp. The word sankalp means thoughts. And so the whole field of psychology and sociology and neurology is also embedded within this line. In fact, there is nothing that is outside of this one statement. Apne to ek akshardham ma jawu che, evo ek sankalp rakho. It has so much power behind it. Once we begin to contemplate and think about it, we can see that everything opens up. So let's go into this further. I was saying that the Akshara Brahma is a imperishable, limitless dimension. It is also called the conscious space, Chidakash. Chid meaning conscious, Akash meaning space, within which infinite number of universes that have been evolved out of Prakriti, out of nature, out of the Mahamaya, exist within this Chidakash. That is a formless aspect of Akshara Brahma. Now, in the history of India and history of the world, many religious traditions, spiritual traditions, mystical traditions have considered that formless substratum as God. And you can consider it that way because that is, where God lives actually. So it's kind of coming from God, part of God. But Bhagwan Swaminarayan, and even you will look at Bhagavad Gita, other scriptures will clearly differentiate between Akshara Brahma and Parabrahma. Parabrahma is beyond the Brahma, beyond Akshara, even beyond the imperishable. Now, it's difficult for our mind to grasp how that can be. If there is an infinite reality, how can there be something even beyond the infinite? But I'll see if I can explain it this way. We have the capacity to grasp infinity. We have the capacity to grasp infinity, at least to think about it, not to grasp it like a finite object, but we can think about it that, there is endless, a sense of endlessness, even like the numbers. What's the highest number somebody can count to? Well, there isn't one. You can always think of something higher and something higher and something higher. So we have a sense of infinity in our mind. And our mind can touch that sense. And that's really what the scriptures are talking about when they mention that Akshara has a formless aspect that is without dimension, that is without limit, that is infinite in all dimensions, that is without limit. So our mind can get some idea that there is such a thing. But when the word Akshardham is used, the word Dham, he didn't just say we want to go into Akshar. We want to go into the Akshardham. That implies, and if you go through all the other scriptures and teachings, that there is the Dhami. Dhami is the supreme being with form residing inside the Akshardham. Dham meaning residence, essentially. It's a abode. Then somebody's living in there. Someone or something is living in there. So is existing in there. So God, meaning Parabrahma, Purushottam, Narayana, the supreme reality, the final entity, the final tattva, is residing inside Akshar, and that is the Dhami that resides in the Dham. Dhami meaning the one who resides in the abode. Just as, for example, Sachinkarnik lives at 201 Michelle Court. I have a condominium here. Sachinkarnik lives in the abode of this place, living in this 201 Michelle Court, Newark, Delaware, 19711. I am living in here, but I am not myself the condominium. I'm different from that. I can leave the condominium, go outside and come in and other things. I'm totally separate from it. So in that sense, Bhagwan or God, Parabrahma, Parmeshwara, different names, exists totally different from Akshara Brahma. They're not the same. In fact, they're completely and totally different. So, what is the relationship between them? We will get into that. But the fact is that the formless aspect, which is what we were talking about, has within it infinite universes. But there is another aspect of Akshara that Bhagwan Swaminarayan has described in Vachanamrut, in other Swaminarayan teachings, that he's probably the only one that has really talked about this. I don't believe anybody else has in this way, where he says that there is a form of Akshara Brahma. That's with form. So it's sakar, meaning there's actually a divine form of Akshara, because most of the non-dualistic Advaita texts in Sanatana Dharma refer to the formless aspect. And then they consider that to be the end point, that is realization. You merge into the infinite, and that's it. And you are that infinite. Tattvamasi. Ayam Atma Brahma. So different statements of the Mahavakyas, the great Vakyas, the great teachings of Upanishad. Soham, For example, I am that. They are all referring to the oneness of the Atma and the Akshar. Atma and the Brahma. Brahman meaning that substratum of reality where there is this oneness and all forms disappear. All of the forms out of Prakriti disappear. So, most of the non-dualistic scriptures, in fact, all of the non-dualistic scriptures end at that point. But Bhagwan Swaminarayan does not accept that that is the end point. And that is a very big difference. That is why in the scripture called Shikshapatri, which is what his own teaching of 212 Sanskrit verses translated into Gujarati, in that teaching, which is his agna, his command for his teachings for his disciples, his devotees, he has clearly stated that he favors the viewpoint of Sri Ramanujacharya. And in that viewpoint of Ramanuj, there is God, Bhagavan himself, and with form. So this is a big change from Shankaracharya to Ramanujacharya. And then from Ramanujacharya, Bhagwan Swaminarayan accepted the three entities he talks about, Jiv, Ishwar, Parabrahma, and expanded upon those three and added Akshar inside there. So Jiv, Ishwar, Maya, Akshar and Parabrahma. These five bhed, he called them, Panch Bhed. So five differentiations. So anyway, without going into all of that too much right now, when Gunatitanand Swami is saying that we want to go into the Akshardham, what is implied here is we want to be in contact with, in seva of, in service of the Lord himself, that there is God himself, Bhagwan. It's not really himself or herself. There's no male or female there. We're just using that language. Like even in Christianity, there is this sense that God is the Father. But that's just a more iconographic, psychological way of conceptualizing God. It is not male or female. It is a form that is not male or female. That is a form like human form, because human form has been made in that image. But it is a divine form. It is Chaitanya. It is a conscious form. It is it is the Lord himself, itself, you can say. It feels funny to say itself, so we'll just say himself for now. And beyond Akshar, meaning even Akshar, as the glory of Akshar, with its the tremendous infinite power that Akshara has, even that Akshar can never grasp fully the Paramatma, the Bhagwan himself, the Parabrahma. So in the Swaminarayan Sampradaya, this is the main point. When Maharaj came, Maharaj meaning Bhagwan Swaminarayan, he talked about himself as being that Murti, that divine entity that exists as the Supreme Lord within the Akshardham. That is the Aksharatit Parabrahma Purushottam Bhagavan himself. And by going into the Akshardham, when this body is left, when this physical body goes away from this world, it is possible to enter into that final state from which no one returns unless they want to, which is a different topic. But it is a state where there is nothing but God and his glory and his form and his powers and his, it's a continuous, endless, ever expanding, ever increasing state of wonder and bliss without any end, because there is no time there. That is another point that we want to go into at some point, but just briefly touch upon it here. That time, Kala, K-A-L-A is time, doesn't exist in Akshardham. There is no time there. All of the other abodes of God, like Goloka, Vaikuntha, Shvetadvip, the ones that are written in the scriptures, and many are not even written. I mean, whatever is written is just from what has come in the tradition on this planet. There are spiritual planets and abodes and places that no one has even imagined even. So those things are not even written in the scriptures. But the fact is that the Paramahansas of Bhagwan Swaminarayan, like Gopalan Swami, also mentioned that even an extraordinary state like Goloka has a certain time period. But what that time period is not something that is our kind of time. It's some divine time, which we don't realize. Because that Goloka is beyond Mahat Tattva, and it is not something that we can grasp mentally. It's not a type of time that we can understand. But even Goloka at some point also merges away into the light of Akshar Brahma. But the Bhagwan in the Goloka is Bhagwan Sri Krishna. So that, and again, because when Krishna came here, Lord Krishna came here, that is where the access point opened up into Goloka. In the same way, when Bhagwan Swaminarayan came here, the access point opened into the Akshardham. So the different incarnations, they came with their certain powers and access points, and those access points became opened. It's like some student who is studying, let's say, mathematics, and if the teacher knows only up to trigonometry, that's all the student is going to get. It's really difficult for the student to learn calculus. But calculus professor comes, now they can learn calculus also. And then beyond calculus is calculus 3 and other subjects, higher level mathematics. In the same way, this one statement of Gunaditananda Swami, apne Akshardhamma jau che ek sankalp rakho, in one sense, it is the most simple and straightforward thing to understand, because it just means that yes, we should just worship God and stay within that state. That's what that means. But in another sense, it has the deepest and highest level of spirituality. It is like postgraduate stuff. It's the highest level. And at the same time, the simplest and the most straightforward. What an interesting combination. It's like, because when Gunaditananda Swami was on this planet at that time, he spoke to villagers. Many of them were uneducated. They didn't know the Sanskrit language. They didn't know all these deep philosophical and scientific ideas that we know now. But he was able to open the access point into the Akshardham by these simple statements and explain them in a way that even an illiterate person can realize the highest reality, Bhagwan Purushottam. And at the same time, those who are the greatest scholars of Vedanta, of Sankhya, Mimamsa, different scriptures, of psychology, of neurology, the highest levels of research done, they would also find these statements extraordinary and beyond their knowledge. This is a great miracle. The statement such as Apne Akshardhamma jau che evo ek sankalp rakho, that we want to go into the Akshardham and keep that mental framework, mental state active all the time, while performing activity in this world, of course, but maintaining that state is the greatest accomplishment of the human being, or greatest accomplishment for any human being. It's not an accomplishment as a physical accomplishment. It is not an accomplishment in the sense of achieving something finite. It's not a finite achievement. It is a movement into a state beyond time, beyond finite goals. It's not a finite goal. We think that going to Akshardham, or perhaps those who are familiar with some of these teachings, feel that God is a goal. God is not a goal. God is a state. When we use the word goal, we're using that word in a finite way, in a materialistic way. Yeah, we can say that, yes, we want to reach God, that's a goal. We can use that word in a different way. But the human mind is stuck with language. And when the word goal is used, the mind automatically reverts to the way the word is used in the material world. And that is not the way it has to be used for spirituality. We can use the word goal, no problem. In fact, the Sanskrit word is dheya, or Gujarati word is dheya even. Marathi word is dheya. And dheya means a destination, a goal, what you want to achieve. It's a realization. But it's not a finite goal. It's not a limited goal. It's not like if you, for example, do 1,000 repetitions of some mantra like Namah Shivaya mantra or Swaminarayan mantra or Krishna mantra, or you read the whole Bible, memorize the Bible. Those are all finite goals. They're good. They're sadhana. They're spiritual tasks. They're endeavors. But the realization of God is not a finite goal. It is moving the mind out of its limited framework into a state of continuous happiness without any boundary or limitation. The boundaries fall away, the limitations fall away. If you go into the Upanishad, there's a statement that the whole world, the whole creation is one family. Vasudeva Kutumbakam. Kutumbakam means one family. That feeling, if the feeling comes that we are all one family, all human beings, all creatures, all living beings living on our beautiful planet and connected with all the other stars and galaxies and all, if we consider it as one family, then that vision opens up further into the realization that everything exists on the substratum of Akshara Brahma. There is nothing, not any living being, not anything that exists in any way has its existence apart from the substratum of Akshara Brahma. It's like all the waves on the ocean. Everything that's on the ocean, everything that is in the ocean also, but the waves on the ocean are like the universes and all of their content that exists is the waves on the ocean of Akshara Brahma. Akshara Brahma is an ocean, that is Chidakash, the formless aspect. And like we were mentioning before, interestingly, in most Hindu scriptures, that seems to be the goal. Not all scriptures, but many. And particularly the non-dualistic traditions, Advaita Vedanta. But Maharaj, Bhagwan Swaminarayan, he does not want anybody to be stuck inside that formless Akshara state. And this is something really remarkable. Because if you look through the history of the research, the inward research that has been done by the sages, all of them in the history of India and throughout the world, once a sage, a mystic, a sadhu, a spiritual aspirant realizes the Atma, that Atma is perceived to be like God, that this must be God. Because it has infinite, endless bliss. Just one's own Atma is infinite, endless bliss. That is called Nijanand. One's own happiness. But God's happiness is different. It's way beyond. See, and this is where the mind becomes totally incapable of understanding this. That is why the Upanishad says, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. There's no way to grasp this concept. Mind cannot grasp this idea. Because the mind will say that if the Atma is infinite, and let's say the mind turns towards the Atma through various spiritual practices and grace of God, let's say, and the Atma is realized, then what? Now you've already gotten endless bliss. The Atma is soul, spirit, who you really are. Then what? Then that seems like the end point, that there's nothing more to be obtained here. And to prevent that from happening, where you get stuck and feel that there is just nothing more here, that is why when one is in a state of doing spiritual practices, sadhana, where one is in a state of bondage, that state of bondage is actually an opportunity to develop the right type of understanding about the nature of God. So in the liberated state, that liberated state will be based upon the type of understanding developed in the bondage state. If the understanding in the bondage state is that the final realization is formless Akshara Brahma or the Atma, formless, if that's the understanding in the bound state, then in the liberated state, one will remain only at that level, that this formless state is the real thing. That is why so much emphasis has been placed in Swaminarayan Sampradaya particularly, and other Vaishnava Sampradayas too, that God is with form, that God exists, that you are not God, you are subservient to God, you are different from God, you can become like God, but as in the liberated state, but you're not God yourself. That idea, a theistic idea, a religious idea, or religious truth in that sense, is really emphasized. Because when one is performing spiritual practices under the influence of Maya, that Maya is really not the problem. The problem is the lack of realization of God. If the intention is set that we want to realize God, the Maya is going to help you 100%. It will be the most beneficial blessing given by Maya. Maya is not anybody's enemy. Maya becomes a bondage due to not realizing that the energy within Maya can be turned towards God. If we realize it that way, then that word sankalp makes a lot of sense. Apne Akshardham ma jau che evo ek sankalp. One sankalp, one truth, one idea must be maintained. To maintain the sankalp meaning thought, but thought has energy. Gnan Shakti, Kriya Shakti, Ichha Shakti, it has energy. That energy that is used by thought, emotion, memory, desire, feelings, our whole inner space, and then the body, if that is turned towards God, that is called ek sankalp, one sankalp. I'm just giving an interpretation of that word. It doesn't mean just like a minor thought. It's like a full combination of all the energies within thought, emotion, memory, and desire, all combined together and then turned towards God through devotion, bhakti. Bhakti means devotion, and in that devotion, the emotion becomes divine. Devotion emotion that is turned towards God becomes divine emotion, divya bhav, divya bhakti, divya prem, divine love. And in that state, then the doorway into the Akshardham opens up. So that doorway is closed for most people because they are running after the pleasures of the senses, running after the feeling that more and more property and money and all the different sense objects and fame and these things are accepted to be real joy, and they are not. They are only waves on the ocean. How long does a wave last? A few seconds only, and then it's gone. Similarly, each human being is only here a limited period of time. What does anybody take with them? Nothing. That is called vairagya. So in this statement of Gunatyananda Swami, apne Akshardham ma jau che, if you want to realize Bhagwan and God and His glory, then the limitations of this world have to be very clear. That we don't take anything with us. Nobody does. Nobody ever has. Nobody ever will. That is called vairagya. It's a vision. And it is also a turning of this energy that is inside our mind and body, turning it towards the devotion of God. Because that same energy is being used to run after the objects of the senses. Oh, more and more. There's a sense of just going after more and more of the sense pleasures. Sex is like that. People who are already well off financially, they want more. Most of them are not satisfied. Many are, perhaps, but many are not. And then the desire for position and power. Many politicians are stuck in that. Their intention is they want power. They want to rule over some people. They want to become, senators, or they want to become the president, or they want to become something or other. Because they feel that is happiness. Well, these are all mistakes. That is not ananda. It is. They can get some happiness. Okay, let's use the word happiness. So I'm going to define it this way: happiness and suffering are on one continuum. It's a polarity. But joy is beyond that polarity. That polarity is called dvanda. Dvanda means duality. Even Gunadhitanand Swami has mentioned in one of his other teachings, in one of his other statements, that whatever happiness exists in Maya, meaning sukha, Maya meaning these things that we're talking about, running after money and pleasures and sex and the position, power, all of that is, let's just say, running after Maya. Or I'll explain that in more detail some other time. But running after that has embedded within it, whatever happiness one gets from any of those things has within it, at various levels, unhappiness also embedded within it. Jetlu kaik maya ma sukh che te dukh vina hoine. So sukh and dukha, happiness and distress, are on one continuum. So that's the polarity. And from a Christian point of view, from a biblical point of view, when God forbade Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, they ate that fruit, and what happened? The duality began. I'll explain that some other time about the Genesis chapter. It's very interesting. But from there, the sense of maleness and femaleness began. From there, the sense of good and evil began. The knowledge of good versus evil. That's all duality. But God is beyond all duality. Dvandatitam gagana sadrusham tattvamasyadi laksham. That means that to go beyond duality. The Atma is beyond duality. The soul, spirit, is beyond the duality of happiness and distress. It is ananda. It is bliss. Sat Chit means truth, consciousness, bliss within oneself, as oneself, not just within, but that is who you are. We'll talk about Atma at some other point, but just as a quick note here, that we feel that the Atma is within us. But actually, the three bodies, physical, mental, and causal, are covering the Atma. So those three are projections of energy out from the Atma, through the Paramatma that is existing in the Atma. So Bhagwan has created this massive three-dimensional reality for us of the physical body, physical, mental, and causal bodies, the three physical, subtle, and causal bodies. He has created those for us, or has given those to us with his energy, so that same energy can be turned towards him. It's a deep subject. And just another very quick note, that the causal body is the manifestation of the soul's, the Atma's, beginningless attachment to Mahamaya. So, did God create the soul? The answer is clearly no, based on Ramanujacharya's Vedanta. Okay, that is why Maharaj, Bhagwan Swaminarayan, accepted that and then expounded upon it and expanded it. Nobody created the soul. The soul has the same kind of quality of truth, consciousness, bliss that God has. Because God is also truth, consciousness, bliss. Akshara is truth, consciousness, bliss. So is the soul of the soul that is inside Maya. Truth, consciousness, bliss. And the Ishvara also is truth, consciousness, bliss. That also has soul. Ishvara meaning the cosmic entities like Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. They're the governors of these universes. So when our mind begins to turn, I'm going to go back to what we were talking about, because the difficulty here is, it's just my difficulty, it's not anybody else's difficulty. When I start talking about any one of these things, all these other areas get connected because it's all one thing, but we cannot talk about everything at one time. So we want to go into it step by step. But the difficulty that exists is this game that is being played with the mind. The mind plays a very tricky game because the mind has a belief that real happiness lies in expanding pleasures that come from the senses. Of course, pleasure has a place in life. It's not to be completely denied. Because if you deny pleasure completely, you will not survive also. Pleasure has a place. For example, if we eat food, we're going to experience pleasure. So should we not experience that pleasure? It's not like that. But that pleasure itself isn't real happiness. Yes, we experience the pleasure, but the attachment occurs towards that pleasure, and that's where the problem comes. So I want to go into some of the psychological aspects of this at this point. The attachment towards the pleasure creates a state of running after that pleasure. And running after that pleasure creates the bondage. And that bondage is called vasana, meaning these deep-seated desires are embedded in the brain, beyond the brain into the mind, beyond the mind into the causal body. That's how the link occurs. If this field of psychology doesn't know anything about causal body, it barely understands the mind. So, but our great rishis, the great inner scientists in Sanatana Dharma, in our Hindu tradition, found that these three bodies exist and how the system exists within each person. So when there is pleasure experienced, that becomes part of one's memory. And that memory is accessed again due to triggers from the outside. So for example, let's say somebody has a nice cup of tea, maybe ginger tea or something that you really like, and you liked it, you drank and you like it with enough sugar or Splenda and the flavor and the right temperature and all of that thing, the right kind of cup that you like. All of that creates a sense of enjoyment. That is sukha, sukh. Sukh meaning happiness, meaning some type of pleasure. And you feel there's a sense of, wow, this is nice, this feels good. Okay, it feels good. But then what? Okay, then if you look at the way the pleasure works, it moves in a wave. It has a beginning, it has a peak experience, and then it has, or a peak state, and then a drop. And then eventually there's a sense of satisfaction that, okay, I have had enough. You had 1 cup, maybe you have 2 cups of tea, and then you say, I don't want any more. So there's no way to obtain continuous, uninterrupted, ever expanding happiness through the objects of the senses. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen because the senses, the mind, and the brain are not set up to open a doorway through stimulation into endless happiness, endless joy, ananda. It's not going to happen. But the pleasure that is experienced through the senses exists because of the Atma, because of God within the Atma. So think of it this way. The waves and the ocean exist because of the ocean. If there's no ocean, there's no waves. So these pleasure experiences are not actually the Atma, but they are like pieces or tiny little fragments of energy that are available to the mind through the Atma. The mind then from mind to the Atma. From Atma to the mind, and then in the mind these waves exist of pleasure and pain, and those waves in the mind are called the gunas, Gunas. Okay, so there's sattva guna, rajas guna or rajo guna, tamas guna or tamo guna. Sattva meaning goodness, Rajas meaning passion, Tamas meaning ignorance. So these are qualities or states of the mind. That's why Gunatitananda Swami, the name is Gunatit. Tit means beyond. Beyond these three waves of the mind. The goodness wave, the passion wave, and the ignorance wave. The Sattva, Raja, Tama. Beyond those three, as soon as one crosses those three, meaning as soon as the mind stops its activity in these three realms and the mixture of these three internal qualities, these three internal fluctuations and disturbances, as soon as that stops, the Atma is directly realized. That you are that powerful, endless Akshara. Because your Atma and the Akshara, their oneness happens right away. Because the Atma is always connected with the Akshara. In one sense, they're different, but if you remove the layer of the three gunas, Sattva, Raj, and Tam, immediately it's available for you. That is why our first task is to turn the mind into the mode of goodness. Sattva guna. Sattvam yad brahma darshanam. That is written in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, Srimad Bhagavatam is one great scripture, 18,000 verse scripture. And Bhagwan Swaminarayan has praised that scripture and used to study, used to, have different preachers read that quite regularly. But so I won't go into all that right now. But the statement that Sattvam Yad Brahmadarshanam is critical because the Sattva Guna is a mode of goodness. But that is still not the realization of the Atma. You can have a clear mind, a pure mind, a mind that is filled with goodness and filled with doing good ethics and values and not running after the pleasures of the senses because you see that the futility of that. It's a great state. It's a sattvic state is a tremendously great state. And such a state is required as a foundation to take the mind and connect it with God through Akshara. Brahma bhutaha prasannatma na shauchati na kankshati samah sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labhate param. This is a verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagwan has spoken this through Lord Krishna in the Gita, through Bhagwan Vedvyas, who actually wrote the Gita. So this verse means that there is a state of just being so clear. Prasanna Atma. Prasanna meaning one who is ever fresh. The problem of the gunas is that the Rajoguna, Tamoguna, the Rajoguna meaning mode of passion and the Tamoguna ignorance and the various fluctuations of anger and greed and negative thinking and all that stuff that humanity is trapped in prevents that mind from being fresh. Mind is not fresh most of the time. For most people, it is filled with agitation and fear. Fear is a number one problem. See, that is why in our Hindu tradition, most of the icons of the gods and goddesses and the sages have a hand gesture of a right hand or sometimes left hand of just an open hand as giving blessing, which means fearlessness. To go beyond fear. It's a big thing. Even from the yoga point of view and from the Kundalini yoga point of view and from the yoga scriptures, the fear exists at the lower centers of the body, this Muladhara chakra, this Svadhisthana chakra, and you can feel that when there's a fear reaction, you feel it in the stomach, when one is afraid. You feel your heart pop, but your heartbeat increases. There's a big physiological change. So to move the mind out of ignorance and passion and bring it into the sattvic state and perform activity in this world without being affected by most of the world that is stuck in Rajasic and Tamasic state, and being in a sattvic state continuously is an extremely rare accomplishment. But that can be done through one's self-effort. That can be done by one's self-effort, no doubt. And that effort needs to be placed to bring the mind to such a state. But then the question becomes, how does the mind become sattvic? How does it become purified? Well, the best and the most straightforward way is by devoting oneself to God, by keeping the mind engaged in God-centered activity. Whether it is a Christian tradition, Muslim tradition, Hindu tradition, any tradition, you will see that theistic traditions that believe in God, all of them talk about keeping oneself engaged in God-centered, God-focused activity. Even in the Bible it says, love thy Lord with all thy heart and lean not on thy own understanding. That is written in one of the Proverbs. So again, the same point is there in Bhagavad Gita, ananyas chintayanto mam. Ananya chintan. Think of me continuously, constantly. Make your mind enter into me. The chapter 12 of the Gita is all about this. Bhakti yoga, the devotional yoga. So that kind of activity that is God-centered, with company of others who are trying to do the same thing, allows for the mind to be turned away from Rajogun and Tamogun into the Sattvagun. But otherwise the mind is a very difficult time becoming purified just by itself. It will not become purified just like that. It will be stuck tremendously. I mean, just as an example, if you just turn on CNN for 5 minutes, turn on almost any channel except for maybe a couple, the mind is bombarded with images and stories and fight the different kinds of conflicts going on in the world, and one person versus another, one politician versus another, one group versus another. It's all conflict driven work. It's all conflict driven, and the mind feeds on that conflict. So all that conflict has a type of stimulation. That stimulation creates these sanskaras inside the mind, and those images, those stories become recorded inside the mind. And by them getting recorded inside the mind becomes a jungle. It becomes a garbage container, trash container. We are careful to a large extent about not eating poisonous food, right? Because we would be dead. We are not careful about what we are putting inside our mind and the poisonous reactions that happen inside the mind, and then how they affect the body. We're not careful about that at all. So when Gunaditanand Swami is saying, "Apne ek sankalp rakho akshardham bajao," in that sentence, ek sankalp has the implication that purify the mind, has the teaching that turn the mind towards God, has the implication that be aware, janpanu, awareness. Janpanu means awareness in Gujarati language. That be aware of what you're doing each moment, what one is doing each moment, what is happening each moment, who is around one each moment, what is being inputted inside the mind. This is spiritual technology. This scripture, Swamini Vato meaning the teachings of Gunaditanand Swami, Vato meaning teachings or language or words, but it means teachings really, and Swamini Ni means his. So Gunaditanand Swami. Swami here refers to Gunaditanand Swami, one of the great paramahansas of Bhagavan Sri Swaminarayan. So his teaching is eternal, and it is an internal science. It is an internal science. Just as I don't know if you're familiar, there's something called Shiv Yoga, and Shivanand Baba has talked about this actually. He uses the expression, the Shiv Yoga is a science beyond science. Shiv meaning the Atma in this case, what we're talking about right now. So from the Jiva state to the Shiva state. Shiva state meaning you are completely integrated, completely whole from within. That is Shiva. So all the energy within you is within the person is combined and concentrate and remaining whole, and that energy goes back into the Atma without fragmentation effect. That opens up the doorway into the Atma. All the fragmentation effect is gone. And once the fragmentation effect is totally gone, all of that energy reverts back into the Atma, and by grace of God, because one has been worshipping any form of God, let's say, in any tradition, but by grace, because God is only one, by grace, the realization of one's own self happens. That you realize, oh, I am myself divine, and I am myself glorious, and I am myself pure happiness, pure joy. I am myself consciousness and truth. So that is not ego, that I. That is the I who you really are. But the devotee of God is not interested even in his own his own ananda. He is interested in the joy that comes from the Lord. Not only comes from the Lord, joy is the source. God is the source of all joy, of ananda. There's an expression in Sanskrit language that God is considered to be Ananda Kanda. Kanda meaning the root, the source of joy. Where joy comes from. So even the joy that comes from the Atma, that's existing in the Atma, or the Atma is joy, that has its origin in the Bhagwan residing inside the Atma as witness. As Sakshi, as witness, or as or in whatever way, as like the giver of the fruit of action. Different ways depending on realization. Bhagwan exists within the Atma. Without his existence, the Atma doesn't have any power of any kind. It doesn't have any power. In fact, there's no energy, whether it is material energy or spiritual energy, that can exist without God, because it is his energy only. There's only one source of energy, that is Bhagwan. The source can only be one, cannot be two. But how it is used varies. So going back to what we were talking about, you can see how I get into different topics here. But we'll just keep going, free-flowing, see where it all goes. But as we move ahead into what we were talking about, the sattvic state is not an enlightened state. It looks like an enlightened state, but it's not an enlightened state. Because one may be in pure sattvic state, and given various circumstances in life or one's own vasana, one's own desires from the past, that sattvic state can flip around into the rajasic state very rapidly by thought. Thought can turn very quickly based on desire. Desires change. The deeper embedded, deep-seated, rooted desires that are not known even to the sattvic mind, not in the awareness of the purified mind, become active, and that purity goes away. So one then swings between sattva gun and rajogun, and most people on spiritual path, in my opinion, and I may be wrong about this, but I don't think I am. In my opinion, they are stuck in this pendulum between sattva gun and rajogun. They're trapped right there. And if you look at the teachings of Bhagwan Swamini in the Vachanamrut, he has mentioned this over and over again. I won't go into all the references right now. There are hundreds of such references. Just in Vachanamrut, Bhagavad Gita is filled with the same thing. Swamini, Vato, Upanishad, psychological texts. If you go into the field of psychology and the different theories that exist about the mind and all, it is all about the same thing. About the swinging between sattva gun, rajo gun, and then of course tamo gun. It's like a pendulum that swings. And that is the entrapment of the jivatma. Jivatma meaning the soul that is trapped inside ignorance is called jiva. Jiva. Is trapped inside maya. And in that maya, that jivatma is stuck among these three qualities of existence, modes of nature. Very well explained even by Swami Prabhupada from Hare Krishna movement. He started the Hare Krishna movement. Many of his teachings, they explain about these three modes of nature. They have good, diagrams and other things like that. If you go to ISKCON website, you can find some really great stuff actually about the modes of nature and how they're binding each person. So, to recognize bondage as bondage is the beginning of the search for freedom. There is no way to actually search for freedom unless one is realizing that one is bound. But if one doesn't realize that one is bound, where is the possibility of even trying to become free? It's not going to happen. I'll give a simple analogy here. So let's say there is a facility that is very, very big. It's like a 10-mile facility underground, let's say. And it's got above level also. But it's all enclosed. There's no windows or anything in there. And 1,000 people are living there. And they have families there. Their kids are born there. All of that is there. And kids are born. And what do they see? They live their whole life in that facility. They think that is the world. Nobody knows there's a world outside. They feel and they have everything they need there. They have food, water, shelter, clothing. They have, their activities going on in that huge facility, and that's it. They have people being born, people dying there. They have a whole system set up. They have no clue there's an outside world. So, where is the issue of anybody in there even searching for freedom if they feel that that's the whole world? Similarly, most human beings who are on our planet feel that this planet and this outside reality and this life that we have is everything. There's nothing more than this. Many people feel that way. The materialists, the empiricists, the people who deny existence of God and all that, they feel that this is the only thing. There's nothing more. And they say that the ideas of God are man-made and this is just all fancy and delusional stuff and things like that. So, we have to look at great sages who have talked about a higher reality outside just this material world. And that higher reality is accessible once the mind stabilizes completely and transgress and goes beyond the sattva guna, the mode of goodness. Goodness is necessary in life, obviously, but there is a state beyond that sattva guna. Then that which is beyond the prison of this mental world, the prison of Maya, can be experienced. Not just experienced, can be entered into. But one can move into that. And this is the great challenge. Just to realize that there is another world outside of this world, or there's a different type of life, a life of total inner freedom, a life of pure joy. I don't want to use the word happiness because happiness and distress are in the polarity. We talked about that before. I want to use the word joy. So joy is that state of ananda, continuous, constant joy. That there is such a thing, which is what everybody is looking for. But we're looking for it through the disturbances of sattva, raj and tam, goodness, passion and ignorance, which are qualities of the mind that exist due to the interaction between the outside world and the causal body. The causal body is the desires. The outside world are the objects outside, and then the mind is the bridge between the two, and the gunas exist within the mind. So the gunas are sattva, raj and tam, and they are connectors. They exist as experiences for the jivatma due to the causal body in connection with the outside world. And that's the prison of Maya. That is why there's an expression in our scriptures, something called Gnan Samadhi. Samadhi, the word Samadhi, I don't want to put too many Sanskrit words in here, but Samadhi here refers to a state of equilibrium, a state of just absolute stability. And in that state, there is a constant vision, realization, like a new and new realization of the reality of God. So again, the Sattva Gun definitely will exist, but there's a state beyond that where the mind still exists, but its function is controlled by God completely, meaning that God's presence is in the mind. So there are great sages who have realized this, and if you go near them, our mind becomes extremely stable and calm right away, just by their presence. Because their mind is not functioning like our mind. Their mind is not functioning in these three modes. It is functioning, but it is functioning with God's presence, completely and only God's presence. So it is a mind that has become overtaken by God. God has taken over the mind. What we have done is we have held on to this mind as ours, and we keep playing with it and thinking that this is the way we're going to find happiness through the pleasures and senses and more money and more sex and more whatever it might be, whatever, more houses or more property or more. We feel that is where happiness is, and because of that, the connection with God is not there. Of course, God is always there. It's very interesting. God is always there, but we are not aware of His presence because of this. So the ability to remain connected with God exists within us. We have our free willpower to connect with God. That is called Purush Prayatna, meaning our effort. Effort is required, no doubt. And we are given the capacity to perform a whole lot of activity. So effort is definitely required. But effort by itself doesn't open the doorway into the Akshardham. Now this becomes an interesting question in itself. If effort cannot open the doorway, what can? How does a doorway open? So that's where the Guru comes in, Satpurush comes in, Satsang comes in, the mind that is contemplating day and night, behind spiritual truths. So many things are required, obviously, but the real answer to this question is that grace of God is required. That is called Krupa. Bhagavan is realized by grace, by His own grace, and not by our efforts. We will continue this next time. Om Shri Swami Narayana Namo Namaha.